Alright, y'all, so today I want to do a little bit of a new comic review. Today I'm going to be reviewing Supergirl, the New 52, Volume 1, The Last Daughter of Krypton. So I recently got the chance to get into the New 52 Supergirl comics out of kind of a whim. I've been reading on and off the New 52 over the years. And if you don't know what the New 52 was, to kind of give you a brief history, it was basically a reboot to DC's entire comic history. Characters were rebooted, new timelines were created. It was basically an ability for readers who maybe haven't read a bunch of the back issues, that maybe have not caught up with the continuity, to basically start out fresh and get in the comics. And, while I do think that the New 52 was kind of a mixed, sort of success, some aspects of it absolutely worked and succeeded, in my opinion. It kind of introduce me to a lot of DC characters in comics. And I've heard other people say the similar things as well. But at the same time, there was a lot of problematic decisions, a lot of bad runs of comics. A sheer volume of content was not good. The universe wasn't really too thoroughly well explained. And in general, there's just some laziness. The fact like the New 52 Green Lantern wasn't a new reboot. It was just a continuation of Jeff Johns' run. That being said, I'm going to get into the New 52 Supergirl comics. Now, to kind of get into this, this is obviously branching off, and it's set, and I believe at the time, which this was released all the way back in 2011, crazy, like 15 years ago at this point. This ties into more of the modern day, at that time, present day New 52 continuity, with that version of Superman that's more modern, because the New 52 had two ongoing titles of Superman. I know, it's really strange. But that being said, I don't really know too much about Supergirl in general as a character. I've seen her a little bit in the animated series over the years. I've seen her here and there and stuff, but I never really got into a full-on comic run. I've read a few issues here and there, but nothing too crazy. So getting into this, I overall like this comic. Volume 1, it collects issues 1 through 7 of the New 52 Supergirl run, and it's pretty decent. They craft a brand new origin, and it's explained well enough, including to people like me, that basically, if you don't know anything about Supergirl, this is a good jumping off point. It basically gives her backstory, her origin story, how she kind of becomes a hero. It's very much an origin story volume. There are some few differences here than the other versions of Supergirl I've seen over the years, like in Smallville and other continuities like the animated series, Superman the animated series. For example, Kara, which this version of the character is Kara. That being said, she kind of shows up on Earth. They kind of give you a brief synopsis of the comic. Supergirl Kara shows up on Earth at some point. The last thing she remembers is she was on Krypton 3 days ago. There's a huge, massive time displacement going on. She wakes up on an unknown planet. She's wearing her suit of armor, her Kryptonian suit of armor that she would have won at something we would later find out would be called the Trials. But she's wearing it. She's on an unknown planet. She doesn't remember what the heck happened over the last few days, or more realistically, decades. And she doesn't know anything about what's going on. She fights some weird robots that are controlled and managed by Simon Tycoon, I believe. He's kind of a villain in this comic a little bit. And she also meets Superman for the first time, kind of on their first encounter. Now, Kara is very rash and abrasive here. She very much jumps to fights first, then later talking it out with other characters. Superman attempts to talk to her, but it's kind of a really interesting dilemma. She only understands Kryptonian just because obviously she's never been to Earth, and Clark, primarily knows English and knows a little bit of Kryptonian. So the way that it's kind of a weird and interesting point of view, but how Superman's coming off to Kara seems really disjointed and weird. But at some point, there's a bunch of events that happen. She gets kidnapped by the businessman I mentioned earlier, with kryptonite. She breaks out with the help of a guy that was established earlier that showed compassion to her. She destroys the station that the billionaire, evil, rich guy had. And then at some point, she goes to her home city, Argo, and we really find out the truth, kind of what happened. Like in traditional Supergirl origin story, her father, Zor-El, basically used technology to create a force field that had its own atmosphere, broke the city off from the exploding planet Krypton. But like in many continuities, the city would die off due to a variety of reasons. And she goes, and basically Supergirl comes back to an abandoned city of her birth, and it's really sad. And then we find out about these creatures. She meets one called Rain, of a race called the World Killers. It's kind of name dropped earlier in the comic. They're created by Kryptonians, basically creatures that are fueled by an unyielding need for conquest and destruction and the need to conquer. We meet one of these creatures called Rain, and she has a whole team of them. Supergirl eventually kind of decides that these creatures are not good. Rain almost at some point in the comic tries to take over the planet. Supergirl escapes from Argos, which at this point in this comic gets thrown into a giant blue sun. She escapes it, goes back to Earth, fights the World Killers, realizes that she needs to protect these people that are innocent, and eventually does that and succeeds and becomes kind of Supergirl that we all know and love. And there's a few other details here and there. So for my pros and cons, I kind of enjoyed this comic quite a bit. I like the story of how it starts. Initially, I wasn't crazy about it, especially how Kara was acting, because in this comic, she acts very rash and abrasive. But I also think from her point of view, it kind of makes sense. I mean, like I said, she's on an unknown planet. She, from her point of view, woke up from, in her mind 3 days ago. And then now she's waking up again to find that her parents are dead, her home city was dead, Krypton exploded. That would make anyone basically go crazy, right? So I totally get that point of view, and I liked Kara as a character. Especially Superman, who I think people have kind of pointed to, he's a little bit of a snobbish jerk, like in some versions of the character. But I think, like I said before, the point of view is that he doesn't really understand Kryptonian that well, so I think that's why it comes off that way to her, which was a nice, interesting twist on the character, but still really cool. And I like how Kara, is in this very hostile environment. A lot of things are trying to kill her, but she still finds a need, which in this version, it seemingly comes from her parents, Zor-El and the mom, basically giving her that compassion, that need to protect the innocent, which she kind of learns by the end of the story and defeats the new enemy of the World Killers, which the idea of that is pretty cool. I like the concept of the World Killers. It's an interesting idea. And they kind of tease there's a fifth world killer, which I'm kind of just assuming is Doomsday in the New 52, which I'm not going to get to that whole weird event where in New 52 continuity, Superman became Doomsday at one point. That was just such a bad comic arc. But regardless, I like the narrative, the arc here. It's pretty good. There's some things here and there I think they could have expanded upon, but I like the flashes and the backstory that are given to her, and Kara just feels like a relatable character here, which I really enjoyed. I also like the art. It's really nicely drawn, colored, inked. It's kind of like I said, that 2010s kind of, in general with a lot of New 52 comics, that kind of art style. But I like that art style. It's clear, it's to the point. The panels are nicely structured, easy to follow. It just makes for a very pleasant reading experience. So I like the panels, I like the artwork, I like the action. I like most of the character designs. I'm going to get into some of my cons later, but some of them are kind of, in my opinion, kind of frankly bad. But, it's all pretty cool stuff. Now I'm going to get into some of my slight cons with the comic, because I definitely do have some. And I do think some aspects of this comic definitely show its age, but I still think it's a pretty good comic for the most part. It's a pretty solid version of Supergirl. We got to talk about that outfit. Now, the new 52 Supergirl had a radical new design for the character. In most versions of the character, she's either presented wearing, the traditional Superman getup, and then she has a skirt and high boots. That's usually the version. And, like I said, some people kind of view that as old-fashioned, but that's been kind of the way Supergirl has looked over the years. Now, many writers have taken cracks at it. Different versions of the character have formed. I mean, the version we saw in Superman the Animated Series was quite different. But that being said, this outfit's pretty radical. Now, the new 52 Superman outfit was pretty radical. It had a bunch of lines. It was meant to look like Kryptonian battle armor. They got rid of the trunks. They gave it a belt. I've always felt the new 52 Superman looked decent enough. I think the belt looks kind of ugly, and the lines are a bit too much here and there, but they don't ruin the suit for me. It's just I think they could have scaled back on the lines. This suit, like the new 52 Superman that Supergirl wears, has that same thing, but she weirdly, number one, has a different symbol than Superman's, which is weird because we've all kind of assumed that's a family symbol, like the House of L. So that's a little bit strange. And to me, I just got total 90s vibes from this. I feel like the designers are like, well, we don't want no old-fashioned skirt. We got to make something extreme looking. So they give her the battle armor, which I don't mind. And they give her this pretty cool cape that kind of looks like a scarf almost. It kind of wraps around her neck, and she has some yellow lining. I really like that change. It just, when you get to the bottom of the outfit, for me personally, and this is just my frank opinion, it gets a little too much. They show a lot of skin with this. And it's kind of weird, too, that they presented this outfit like, Kara's going to get this once she completes this thing called the Trials on Krypton. So what, she's going to be walking around like this all the time? I don't know. It's just a little bit, they show way too much skin, like up to her legs. Like, it's like all the way up to like basically where your underwear would be for a female. Right up to, of course, when the butt kind of ends. I'm not trying to make this sound weird, but it really looks quite strange and really confusing. It's a bit too much to me. And I do like the boots. I also like the little pattern of red that kind of stripes out from the boots that reaches to her knees. That looks cool. But I think, in my opinion, they should have, number one, made the bottom section of the red kind of poke out a bit, not so high up the butt, but make it more towards like maybe the top or upper part of the thigh. I've seen also other custom versions of this suit where they kind of, in the skin areas, they added a mix of blues and dark blues, and it looks pretty good. At least to me personally. So yeah, I just couldn't like read the comic, and I'm like, okay, this is a bit too excessive. I don't know. And I'm glad that other future versions of Supergirl have kind of avoided this. I get it, like they were trying to avoid the skirt, and there's definitely ways of doing that, but this version is like a bit too excessive. I don't hate it. I don't hate it, but it's just kind of, I had to point it out. And some of the other designs of characters, like the World Killers, some of them look cool, like Rain looks cool, but there's like another one that's like a panther. I forget the name, like I think it's Deanax or something. That was his name. And he's like a panther, tiger. He has armor, and he has this awful 2011 haircut. Like, he looks like he was on the set of a My Chemical Romance music video. Hideous design. I just could not read the comic and not laugh a little. And some of the other World Killer designs are just kind of mixed. Like, they could have made them look more epic and look more threatening instead of just typical intergalactic species villains. But yeah, like I said, I think despite some issues with design, I do think too there should have been a little bit more development and sort of push to kind of go into Kara's backstory a bit more. To maybe, I guess, like I said, there could have been more scenes with Jor-El and Kara in the past to kind of help flesh out her transformation from becoming a scared person to becoming a hero, or at least to someone that needs to protect the innocents and accept that Krypton's gone. I mean, in the comic itself, with the issues that are presented, it does it pretty well, but I think there could have been a few more scenes added to make that change a bit more natural and visible. But other than that, I don't have too many cons to the New 52 Supergirl. I know I have a lot of issues with New 52 comics in general, but this is kind of one of those few. It's kind of like a diamond in the rough. It's actually pretty solid. And if you don't know a lot about Supergirl, highly recommend it. It's a good jumping off point, especially for myself. A lot of really good stuff in this comic. It's a pretty decent beginning to the series. And yeah, that's my thoughts on Volume 1 of New 52 Supergirl. Hopefully you all have a good day and peace, y'all.